how long is the history here? And there are a number of ways you can approach this. Archaeologists, like historians, we like to break things down into time periods. And so we start things off with the Paleo-Indian period, going back a little more than 12,000 years ago, and take it up to the contact period. And these are terms you'll see in the archaeological literature. I mean, you folks know best. I wouldn't burden your students with those. They're just sort of abstractions. But one of the things it does show you is that there is a lot of time here. And there are different ways to express that time. BC, AD, you see, BCE, before Christian era. One of the things you're going to see in a lot of the archaeological literature is the term BP. And that simply means years before present. And that's something that actually comes out of radiocarbon dating. So when you see that somewhere, that's what it means. And that can be a useful thing too. I mean, saying something is 13,000 years old or 13,000 years before present, that makes sense to people. I think they get that. There is also this distinction between prehistory and history. And this used to be pretty simple and straightforward. And the academic distinction is this. History begins when you have the first written accounts, the first primary documents describing people in a given area. That's when history begins. So in the Monadnock region, when does history begin? Maybe the 17th century. So it's fairly recent, and everything before that is prehistory. And so almost all of the history of the Abenaki people would be consigned to the prehistory category. Some of my Abenaki colleagues, some of my native colleagues more broadly, don't like these terms because prehistory to them sort of conjures up dinosaurs and fossils and something that is different from other people. And so we have begun to move away from that, and the distinction we make and that we're making in this workshop is between contact and pre-contact. And so those are terms that you're going to see increasingly being used. Okay, now for archaeologists, there are a couple of ways that we do time. One of them is through radiocarbon dating. A scientific technique that involves things with physics and isotopes that, I'll be quite honest, are a little beyond my knowledge. But I trust the radiocarbon labs to do this well. And all of our absolute dates on sites in this region, when we say something is 5,000 or 8,000 or 13,000 years old, comes from radiocarbon dating, which you can do on any organic material, anything that was at one point alive, like wood or bone. So that's where we get our actual dates and years. And then by using radiocarbon dating, we've been able to work out how the styles of certain kinds of artifacts, like these stone tools or like pottery, how these styles change through time. And once we know that, we can use them as time markers. The same way that when you see an old car go down the street, you know what vintage that car is. You know the difference between a car from the 1930s and one from the 1950s. And so we're able to do the same sort of thing. So I think we have a pretty good handle on time here. Now, one of the things that is exceptional about the Monadnock region is that we have a couple of sites that are among the oldest in New England and perhaps even the oldest in northeastern North America. The first of these, in terms of discovery, is the Whipple site. And then the second site is one that I'm sure many of you have heard about. We discovered in 2009 before the construction of the Keene Middle School. And it turned out to be one of the most remarkable sites in all of New England because things were so well preserved, so old, so intact. We were able to learn a tremendous amount. So just very briefly, at the middle school, we have 4 clusters of artifacts. Sort of oval-shaped clusters of tools and chips of stone and burned pieces of animal bone. And they all date to the Paleo-Indian period, the very first time period of human occupation. And we found these before the construction of the school. They were required to do this sort of project. And so we did a very meticulous excavation, trying to precisely map in, as we're doing here, the location of every single artifact we found. And this is what our, excavating each one of these clusters, this is what they looked like as we're getting toward the end of the excavation. And when we made a map of all the artifacts that we found here, what we saw was that formed a nice oval. If you were to draw a line around where all the artifacts were, that line creates an oval for you. And that was the first step in really sort of deciphering this site. We also had, this is the first of our clusters, we also had this odd line of stones right here, which is going to turn out to be really important, sort of outside but parallel to this oval cluster of artifacts. So there's your oval. And there's just a lot of stuff. But if you clean it up, it has pattern, because within that oval, there was a very tight concentration of burned animal bone fragments right in the center of this. Okay, they were not randomly distributed. They were very, very tightly in the center. There's that weird line of stones. Okay, and that's what they looked like coming out. Now you can see they really form a very nice line. And once we had photographed them and mapped them, we carefully removed the stones. And these are just natural Cheshire County pieces of granite. Haven't been modified or anything like that. But once we took them out and excavated the soil under them, we found a beautiful Paleo-Indian scraping tool. So whatever they are, they're part of the site. This is one of the other concentrations we had, with a nice big map with, again, another really big oval cluster of artifacts. And again, when you clean it up, we have a cluster of burned bone right in the middle of it. And one of these bones was identified as caribou. Now, we don't think about caribou as being here in Keene, but at the end of the Pleistocene, they were. And they were one of the big game animals for the Paleo-Indian people, and we've got evidence of that right here. Now, what we think we have was something like this. It's a location where families came at the end of the Ice Age. They set up tents, probably made of caribou hide. They spent the winter here because we're seeing everything happening inside the tents. Nothing is happening outdoors. And winters at this time were particularly brutal. And as they're sort of hunkering down and getting through the winter, when spring comes, they'd take their tent down, move somewhere else, and they would leave behind a nice tent-shaped cluster of all their debris. And so that's what we have here. It's a remarkable ability to sort of walk into somebody's house from the end of the Ice Age and ask all kinds of nosy questions about what they're doing. And since we have 4 of them, we can compare them to each other. And this data is available. This is something students can work with. And since the middle school opened in 2011, some of the teachers at the middle school have incorporated this material into their curriculum in social studies and in science, and I've worked with them on a lot of this. They've raised money for an educational boardwalk, done all sorts of remarkable things. So yeah, what we have with that weird line of stones, that probably marks where the wall of the tent was. And so we have the whole thing. We have a fire in the middle, a work area around it, and the wall is showing you the sleeping area. So we can estimate how many people could fit in each one of these tents. It's a remarkable glimpse back into the past. And we were also able to get a radiocarbon date on some of the burned caribou bone. And the date that came back in all of this, the jumble of numbers, this one here is the crucial one. And again, with BP, meaning years before present, it says that animal bone is between 12,570 and 12,660 years ago. There is no older dated site anywhere in New England. This is as old as it gets, and it's right here in Keene. And this is in a sense the beginning of the story. There are other sorts of things here. I was talking about the big world that these people lived in. And working with geologists, we've been able to find out where they're getting the stone for their tools, because they were very fussy. They only used the highest quality stones. And there's not a lot of good quality stone in this region for making things like spear points. And all of their material came from northern New Hampshire, from either Jefferson or there's a quarry on top of Mount Jasper in Berlin. A really sort of dramatic site. It's actually a cave because native people took so many tons of stone out of this that they created a cave you can walk into. Half of our tools in Keene are from that quarry site. And that quarry site's on the backside of Mount Washington. And somehow this material is making its way down here. So this is a complicated, big world, and all the rest of the material is coming from north central Maine, 350 miles away. Right, so you think about the social networks that people had to have to get resources from that far away. It really is a very interesting world. Okay? It's not a town so much, it's all around Munsungan Lake. Okay? And this material is all over the place. Right, up there, and it begins to be used during this Paleo-Indian period, and that, just to give you again a sense of the size of this world, that material from northern Maine during the Paleo-Indian period is found as far south as New Jersey. All right, so these folks really did have extensive connections all throughout the region, and so to emphasize again, there isn't a single native history, a single native story. There is change here.